A colleague of mine suggested that I might want to read Free Range Kids in the context of developing their leadership potential. So I picked it up and I was so excited about the book that I asked the author, Lenore Skenazy, to actually be on my podcast. So in this session, you're going to see how being a helicopter parent not only affects their ability to lead well, but also their ability to be a good citizen and to be a confident young adult. I think you're going to learn a lot from this session as we talk to Lenore about free range kids, helping our kids become more confident young adults. Enjoy.
Welcome to another edition of Kid Lead Academy Training Series with Dr. Alan E. Nelson, designed to help parents develop their children to lead so they can succeed. And now, here's Alan.
Hey, Lenore, I want to tell you not only welcome to this program, Kid Lead, but I want to tell you how much I loved your book. It was just
Tell me more.
it was just an amazing thing to think of free range kids, because my kids, our oldest son and his family, they have chickens. They live in Durham, North Carolina. He works for Duke and she's an Episcopal priest, and they live in Durham, and they have this chicken coop. And so they're into organics and urban farming and all of that. So when I thought free range, and I'm a farmer, right? I grew up on a farm. I'm not a farmer. I grew up on a farm. So the whole idea of free range struck me as kind of tongue in cheek. This is great. And then when I read the book, I laughed. I said, yes, that's right. And so I just am so thrilled that you were willing to come on. So for anyone who's not read the book, and hopefully by the time they're done, they'll have ordered it from Amazon or Audible. Define for us what free range kids is in terms of a concept, and then we'll unpack it a bit in the context of leadership.
Oh, okay, great. First of all, thanks for having me. Thanks also for that ringing endorsement of the book. Laughing was my main goal, and then maybe teaching a little bit is goal number 2, far second. Really, it's just like, I just want people to laugh. I used to write for Mad. So
You did.
I did. I wrote for
Alfred E.
Mad.
Newman. I remember those. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Too bad it died. So anyway, free range kids is the idea of, it's, boy, it's been 16 years. You think I would get this down pat, but basically it's an old-fashioned childhood. It's trusting kids with some independence, thinking that when they're not with us all the time, that's okay. They're probably not inert. They're probably not being hurt. They are just out there being part of the world and learning things on their own. Not everything has to come from an adult, and not everything has to be organized by an adult, and not everything has to be supervised by an adult.
And I love that. So again, people watching this video or listening to the podcast, they're thinking of it in terms of leadership, because that's what we're about, right? Developing a child.
Yes, that's what sorry, I should have said leadership is giving your children a free range childhood, but it really is. I mean, how do you get to lead if you're always in the passenger seat being taken someplace where another adult is going to tell you what to do?
Exactly. So I saw, our work here at Kid Lead kind of as a subset, because so often parents and educators, adults in general, we infantilize our adolescents, and we basically underestimate what our children can do. So why do you think that is such a societal thing, and what has caused that? What's exacerbated this whole fear thing?
That of course is the whole topic of the book. I think what has happened to us as adults is a couple of things. One is that we've sort of lost faith that kids can do anything when we're not with them. The idea is, like, how do you sell after school programs? How do you sell 1 million online programs? How do you sell expensive toys and educational programs and assistants and tutors? You basically drain the parent's confidence that the kid is doing anything other than just sitting there either scrolling through TikTok or posing nude for a boyfriend, unless you're with them all the time. And really that all came from the draining of the confidence in the kids. Started in the 80s, I would say. Everybody always thinks history begins right when they begin, but the 80s did change things. The 80s were the years that we first got cable television, which meant a 24-hour news cycle. How do you keep people glued to the screen? You scare them, right? It was also the 70s began action news and eyewitness news, which are these two formats that I can't tell apart, that were really cheap and easy for local television to do, which is go to where there's been some crime, and you can live in nirvana and there will be a crime somewhere and there will be a reporter there showing it to you as if this is what's happening every day everywhere, when it's actually rare and they have to run to it, and it's treated like gold because it is gold for the networks and for now for the online world, because the more you can upset people, the more you can scare people, the more you can keep them glued to the screen. There's actually something called mean world syndrome, which was documented by a sociologist a while back, which is that the more you watch TV, and now I would say, and just the entire web, the more horrible you think the world is. So you don't go out in it, which means that you're on the screen some more, which means that you see these horrible things, which means that it just reinforces the idea that the world is horrible. Now throw kids into that, and you start thinking, my kid can't go outside, they wouldn't have any idea what to do if something bad happened, and something bad may happen, and I would feel so guilty. And so you keep them inside, and then you look at them and you're seeing a sort of unactivated human being, and you're like, well, that kid can't go outside. And it's like, they can't go outside because you haven't let them go outside. And so the whole ethos of Let Grow is to break this cycle of anxiety on the parents' part about the kid, and then the kid's anxiety because they're ready for more than they're being allowed to do. It's sort of like those caged chickens versus the free range ones. There's something wrong, right? You keep growing, 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 but the space isn't growing. The trust isn't growing. And so how do you break out of that? Well, parents have a really hard time knowing when they're allowed to give their kids some independence now, because all of the age-old freedoms and responsibilities that kids used to get sort of just, because that's what happened and that was the social norms back then. At 5 or 6 or 7, you'd walk to school. At 9, 10, 11, you might have a paper route. At 12, 13, you might be a babysitter. And when all of those milestones are buried under, the dust of fear, parents don't see that. And so they need a little push to let their kid go, because it's only by letting go that they then start getting this other feedback. Instead of, my kid can't do anything, they're so anxious, I'm worried about them. It's, look at what my kid did, and even, oh my God, my kid went, I gave him $10. He came back with a candy bar and no change. I better, look into that a little. But either way, action breaks the cycle. And Let Grow is dedicated to making that action, letting go, easier, because we suggest that schools do the Let Grow experience, but parents can do it too. But we love schools doing it, which is giving kids the homework assignment to go home and do something new on your own with your parents' permission. Talk about it with your parents, but without your parents. And the reason we love schools doing this is because when a whole class or school district is letting go, parents have a much easier time of doing that, because you've taken away the guilt. You've given them a shove, not even a push, a little shove to open that door, and you've normalized it. All the other kids are doing it. All the other parents are doing it. And then everybody is getting this feedback, because the kids are talking to, oh, what did you do? Oh my God, look at your hair. What happened? Well, I got my own haircut. Oh my God, I want to do that. We're just trying to reverse engineer the childhood, the good childhood experiences, the opposite of the adverse childhood experiences that got leached out of childhood over the past, I'd say, 2 generations. So I'll pause now. I realize I haven't given you my whole spiel about how we got to this point, but that's how we get out.
Well, I mean, you articulate it so well, and I think there's this misunderstanding of, how the times have gotten so badly. You hear people say this in conversations. Oh my gosh, I remember when I was a kid, as if the times have changed. And I'm going to read some stats. They're right from your book. I love the book that it's not just subjective opinion, but you talk about your own, as a parent, your own struggle with letting go, but also then you support it with statistics. For example, in 2011, there were 105 abductions by strangers in the United States, which sounds atrocious, and it is. 9 people were killed. But again, that's out of 330 million people. And yet, children are 400 times more likely to be killed in a car crash. And yet, every day we put them in cars. They're 50 times more likely to die of fire, 70 times more likely to be drowned, and 9 times more likely to be molested by someone that you know as a family. So it seems like this sort of swooping in and taking children is happening off of every other street corner, and we know that's not true. So, any perceptions or ideas why we have as a society been so hung up on this one very, very minor statistic to make it now a societal norm?
Yeah, it's sort of all I think about. Uh, I guess at a meta level, I think what has happened is that we've come to believe, and we've sort of been admonished to believe that we actually can control for every conceivable misery that could possibly, visit our families, our children. And I, it keeps feeling more oppressive, this idea of control. The more seeming control we're given. I mean, now my parents, your parents, could not see you after you left the house in the morning and you went to school and then you came home. And so that was like, what, 7 or 8 hours they didn't see you. And then my guess is then they didn't see you for another 3 or 4 hours because then you were outside playing with your friends. Then you quickly ate dinner. And then there was another couple hours when they probably didn't see you. The fact that parents can see their kids, whether by tracking or by cameras in the classroom or by a bell that dings that tells you your child has arrived at school, it tells you on your phone. It's giving you this omniscience now. And weirdly, that seems to confer omnipotence, but it doesn't. So now you're just afraid every single second that you're not in control. You can't see your kid. My friend, not a friend, a woman I met at a conference showed me her phone. Her daughter is in preschool, and it had these numbers. If I had longer, I could like scroll through my pictures and find it because I took a picture of her phone. But it was like 9:28 a.m. P, 11:22 a.m. P, 12:06 p.m. P, comma BM, right? 2:05 p.m. P. And how many orange segments she ate, and whether she drank her whole milk, and did she eat the half sandwich, and was it on the pre-approved bread?
Wow.
And it was so minute. It really feels like what we've been told as parents is that we're the owners of a very finely calibrated factory. And if we keep looking at every gauge and knob, we can keep it running perfectly. And so we better keep watching every single second and imagining what would happen if we screw up. And so it's the combination of thinking that you can and must control, plus this excess information that allows us no time to grow trusting of our kids, no time to develop faith that they probably got to school, they'll probably come home again. You're not even allowed to think that way anymore, right? The school will alert you, your child is here fine. It's like, I sort of thought so. So you're really supposed to be doom scrolling in your brain until you get one reassuring ping after another. Your kid got on the bus, your kid ate his snack, your kid had a BM, hooray. Oh, it's a little late. Yesterday I was 11:03 and now, so it's too much information and it's too much of a sense of control. And then overarching that is the idea that the second you take your eye off the ball, all bets are off. And I was the example I give, because it's the most, I guess, striking and appalling, is that a guy I know in suburban Tennessee or Kentucky, forgive me for forgetting which one it is, I think it was Kentucky, as a 12-year-old, and he lets the 12-year-old go 2 doors down to her friend's house. And when the kid comes home, the mother of the other 12-year-old walks this girl back the 2 houses. And her reason is just, maybe a little self-deprecating laugh, but it's like, I just couldn't forgive myself if anything bad happened. And it's like, we're almost in such safe times that you can't tell the difference between walking 2 houses home in suburban Kentucky versus walking 2 miles home in, Kiev at this point. It's really, we've really lost our perspective. And my worry for this next generation, since we're talking about kids lead, is that there's some preliminary studies being done at Georgetown University in the idea that kids today are getting their freedom and independence, I guess they're the same thing, so late that it's beyond the time that they were supposed to be developing their internal sense of risk and safety. And the theory is that from age 5, 6, or 7 till about 12, the actual rate of growth of a kid sort of slows down, but the rate of the brain is like going nuts. And what it's really doing is it's expecting, the brain needs information, needs real life to wire it. And so it's expecting kids to be, climbing trees and crossing the street and, being chased by dogs and trying a new food and, arguing with a friend. It is expecting all these experiences to start pruning those synapses up there to figuring out like, well, don't go past that house. That dog is really mean. And, oh, I argued with, Jerry yesterday, but today we're back to being friends. You just need a lot of real life that you've grappled with for you to develop not just street smarts, but an internal, I call it a riskometer. And the theory is that if you get it later, it's sort of like learning a language later, which is that you can still learn, other people, not me, smarter people than me, can still learn languages after puberty, right? But they'll always have an accent. And that's what's happening with our sense of risk. It's not that all bets are off, but that if we're talking about kids lead, if you want kids to start out with the full deck, you need to give them this experience from 5, 6, 7 through 12 of doing some things on their own without an adult saying, here, that looks hard, or, oh, you must be sad. Or I brought it home. I used to have here, I'm at our summer place. We sound really rich. It's a shack. That was my son's trophy from the bowling league when he was here, which it was an 8th place trophy out of 9 teams. and it's like that's an insult. It's an insult. It's an insult that kids can't take it. Oh my God, he was like 13 or 14. He can't see that he obviously is a terrible, terrible bowler if he's losing out to these other suburban kids and he's like 8th place. So it all boils down to this idea that what we really need to do is develop our trust muscle. Because once we can trust our kids more, then they're getting the experiences they need. They need our love. They need us to be, securely attached, but then they need to go away from us and see who they are without us always helping them or without another adult coaching, teaching, tutoring, helping, high-fiving them.
Yeah. I think, and we see the same thing in developing young leaders, is that we distinguish leadership from just being a good person and, a confident individual. But ours is in the context of trusting a child or a youth to lead their peers, right? So leadership is always done in groups. So it's a similar thing, though, where, you're talking about just trusting our kid to be out of our sight for a while and then being able to come back. We're saying in the context of leadership that we're willing to put a leader lanyard around a student and say, okay, here are your 5 team members, lead them in this objective, whether it's a home objective or something in the community. But I think it comes down to, and you talk about that in the book, where we feel like we're being a responsible parent by caring, but actually we're being irresponsible because we're setting them up to be fearful, to lack confidence, and to not have these experiences that throughout history kids have had. And so if you can talk a little bit about that sort of false hope we have as a parent to think that we're actually helping our child when we're really adversely hurting them, we're hindering them.
Okay. I'm getting so literally hot under the collar. I have to take off the coat. It's really cold where I am.
Go for it.
So first of all, I don't want to blame parents, because when you live in a culture that says no child can get off the bus without the parent there to walk them home, no child will be let out of school if they, live more than a mile away. We won't let them walk home. No child can be let off at school in the morning without the parent being there. No child can come to karate class without the parent watching the class. So no child can be let out of the YMCA without a parent signing them out. I mean, these are all real things. And so even if you want to be the most free range parent around, there's a lot of constrictions that are not just the social norms. And then there's the social norms. Everybody's waiting with their kid at the bus stop. Why wouldn't you? Are you the lazy one? Are you making me watch your kid? It's a sort of icky idea that all children are basically bars of gold, right? And so they have no agency, but they're really valuable. So you better watch them all the time, because otherwise, it's your fault if I steal it because you were such an idiot. So it's, first of all, not thinking of kids as kids, it's thinking of them as valuable items. And that's not the parent doing that. That's a culture that has just sort of defined them as that. But in terms of leadership, it's funny you mentioned, 5 kids and one gets the lanyard and you're going to lead and here's the objective. There's a more version of that, and it's called play. And
yeah.
so Let Grow is the nonprofit that grew out of free range kids. And I have to say, one of my co-founders is Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation, who's just getting us a lot of donations these days and a lot of publicity. So it's just great. But in The Anxious Generation, in Free Range Kids book, and through Let Grow, what we're trying to do is do 2 things through the schools. And as I say, we go through the schools because that's how you can really change social norms. If you're the only person who's sending your kid to the grocery, like the lady I talked to this morning, whose kids were stopped by another woman who said, "You're standing here until I get the police. This is against the law." And then the police came and said, "It's not against the law." But they were stuck there with this lady haranguing them. And then the kids were, by the way, 9 and 12. Right? Somebody thought that a 9 and a 12-year-old were not old enough together to be at the grocery. I mean, that's kind of nuts. Once again, back to the social norms as opposed to parents. But so Let Grow wants schools to do the Let Grow experience, where kids get the homework assignment to go do something on your own without your parents. But the other thing that we would love all schools to be doing is to do what we call a Let Grow play club. And we shouldn't have called it that, because then people think it's just for babies. But it's basically, you keep the school open before or after school, or both, for mixed age, no devices, loose parts, free play. Mixed age, because that's how kids have always grown up until very recently. The idea of segregating, it's like, can you imagine like the Native Americans saying, no, the 7-year-olds cannot be with the 12-year-olds. No, they shouldn't be, you're in basic pottery and those 12-year-olds are in advanced, basket weaving. So mixed age play is really interesting in terms of leadership for this reason. Peter Gray, who's one of our other co-founders, who you should have on this show, has spent his life, he's a professor of psychology at Boston College, studying mixed age play, especially in tribes around the world. And one of the things he points out is that when you have ages mixing together, everyone at some point becomes a leader, because it's not just that you have the most leadership qualities or the loudest voice or you're the fastest. It's you're the 12-year-old and there's 5-year-olds, right? You're the one who can give them a piggyback ride. And his favorite example is that if you have 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds together, if you have just 7-year-olds, sorry, trying to play a game of cards, it's impossible. It's a disaster. They cannot do it. But if you have 7-year-olds playing with 9-year-olds, and I took a picture of this one summer, then the 9-year-olds they're not polite adult teachers, but they are saying like, don't show us your cards, hold up your cards, don't throw here, take that card back. You have to save the ace. The ace is important. And by doing that, the older kids are learning what? They're learning how to explain something, how to understand something well enough to explain it, how to lead, right? Because they have these 7-year-olds who have never played hearts before or whatever. And meanwhile, the 7-year-olds who don't want to look like babies or idiots around these cool 9 and 10-year-olds start holding up their cards and don't cry when when they lose. And they have to hold themselves together and become more mature too. So we've shied away from mixed ages because there's so many adult run activities that we do them by age. It's the only segregation we allow anymore. It's like the 7-year-olds are with the 7-year-olds. But when you mix them back together, you have the impulse among the older kids. Everybody worries that they're going to bully the younger kids, but generally there's some empathy that gets turned on. And empathy is part of leadership, right? You realize like, oh, that kid's unhappy. I'm going to put him on first base. Right? Or, oh, that kid's really slow, but I can have him keep score. I mean, so you're problem solving, and you're doing, and part of the reason is because you have all these different ages and abilities, right? And the nice thing about the mixed ages is then at some point, even those 5-year-olds will be the 12-year-olds, and then they will get to assume the mantle of greatness and start organizing the younger kids. And I watch it here. There's directing. There's a lot of kids running around outside where I live all the time in the summer. But I also see like we're all going to be superheroes. Okay, you're Spider-Man, you're
Yeah, yeah.
Superman, and it's not like I'm Superman and you guys are the helpless citizens of, Queens, right? So you just got to mix them back together. So if you keep the school open for free play, what you have is a place that parents already trust. Even if you live in a very dangerous neighborhood, your kids are already there. You have time, which is way more than at recess, which is often 20 minutes. Here in New York City, it's 20 minutes. It's horrible. And then you have the most thing, which is a critical mass of other kids. And since if kids leave, the chances of them all reconnoitering at the park are pretty slim. They're either going to be going to an organized activity, once again, where the leadership is assumed by an adult, or they're going to be in their room on a device, which, we're device agnostic at Let Grow. But it's not the same as just running around and playing and having to come up with something as opposed to something entertaining you.
I agree 100%. And one of the things we do to try to teach adults, or at least when we were working with schools, on sort of the natural social influencers is to say, okay, get them out of the classroom where you have an adult authority figure. Look who in the lunchroom or look who on the playground is the instigator, the person deciding what you're going to do at recess. And that's where they shine. But it just, we create this sort of artificial environment where we don't let them lead, or maybe it's just one or two, as opposed to experimenting with, who has that ability and, oh yeah, I want to follow Johnny and all that. So I have a question for you.
Mhm.
So you're talking mostly about parents and mostly about, for example, school educational systems. But when we think of the danger thing in the United States, we have so many shootings. Like we live in Thousand Oaks, which is such just it's notorious for being a safe community. But just a few years ago, 1 mile up, the next exit up, they had the borderline shootings. A former Marine who had some psychological problems, shot and killed 11 people,
Oh my
uh,
God, I don't even
killed
remember that.
himself, and then a police was killed, a sheriff in friendly fire. So it was just, it was
Horrible.
shocking to have it happen anywhere. But for us in Thousand Oaks, who we think of ourselves as safe suburbia from LA, so I'm saying we have those events going on, and yet those aren't necessarily, uh, bad parenting or bad school systems, but still they're happening. How do we convince parents and educators to still have freedoms with this lingering fear that's seemingly prevailing a lot of people's attention these days?
Um, I have never seen anything convince a parent of anything except seeing their own kid do something and realizing, wow, that was easier than I thought, and I'm prouder than I've ever been. So, um, if we began this conversation with you quoting some statistics from my book, which are that, you know, rare, terrible things can happen anytime, anywhere. That's why they're rare and surprising. And so you can't really organize your life around that. You try to make things safe. Like I would always, like if I had a swimming pool, I would have a fence around it with a lock on it. I sure don't want my kids just wandering in there or any other kids or pets or anybody. So you do what you can that makes sense. You keep your kid, safety belts are great and helmets are great. I mean, when I started Free Range Kids, um, I tried to explain that I actually love safety. There was a bonfire here last night. I was the person furthest from it, right? So I'm not like a daredevil at all. And also somebody kept putting more logs on it and like touching all the wood. I'm like, why are you doing that? Just throw it in and run. So I'm not pro danger, but the fact of the matter is whether your kid is outside or inside or in a car or I mean, like a rare, terrible thing could happen at any time. So I'm not saying there is a way to avoid that. There isn't. You sort of have to trust the odds. I mean, that's all we have. We are humans on Earth. There's no way to be perfectly safe at every single moment. If there's a way to get perspective, you try to look at other eras or other countries or American history and realize that compared to almost any other place and any other time, we are super safe. Even when I was growing up, wow, it was a totally different, like 4 times more children died between the ages of 1 and 5 when I was a kid than die now. And it might have been from diphtheria or whatever it was, but it's just, they are safer times. It's always hard to keep perspective. So the only thing that gives parents a shot in the arm is letting go and realizing, my gosh, that's great. And why was I so worried? And I'm so proud. It's the kid is the only thing that can rewire a parent.
Yeah.
And the only way to get the kid to be able to show the parent what they're capable of is by a trusted authority saying you must let go. And that's what Let Grow is trying to do.
Yeah. I think that's one of the probably the misnomers of people that hear the word, the title, and hear some of the stories, from America's Worst Mother, and they just assume you're being a derelict of duty, because there are certainly those those parents out there who are not caring. But what I loved about the book was in the stories you tell and the statistics you share, you're saying dereliction of duty is it's not
Way bigger.
caring. You're always caring, wearing helmets, wearing seatbelts. The issue is dereliction of duty, and you don't use those words, I'm using them. It is when we bubble wrap them so much that we create fearful adults and we don't prepare them for the real world. And that's what I really liked about it. And that's what I got out of it. And of course, that's our shtick and our burden here of saying, hey, we need to be thinking about raising effective and ethical leaders before they ever get a job, right? Before they ever even get to college or some executive program. We need to be teaching them how to run problems, problem solve, resolve conflict, all of those things as 5 to 15-year-olds, 5 to 18-year-olds. So that's the kinship that I got from that. And I guess just a couple more words. If you were talking to a younger Lenore, right? Maybe a 20-year younger Lenore, what advice
what are you implying here?
What advice would you give her?
A nice young Lenore.
I didn't say that. A younger Lenore.
Yeah.
What advice would you give her?
Oh, I'd tell her, go write that article about letting your 9-year-old ride the subway. Your entire career depends on it.
You did it. You did it.
Yeah.
All right. So what advice would you give the non-Lenores who are saying, oh, I would like to do that, but maybe my spouse wouldn't let me, or maybe I still have that fear in the back of my head saying, don't do it?
I don't know if it's so much advice, but what I've realized over the years of, talking about this whole issue of like how we got so afraid is you sort of have to, this is a strange example, but I live in New York City, and New York City has 5 boroughs. There's Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Manhattan, and the Bronx. And if you go to Staten Island, too bad. No, if you go to Staten Island and you look back at the beautiful skyline of New York City, there's this brown, yucky haze over it, right? And you go, ooh, I didn't realize it was so polluted. And then the minute you're back in Manhattan, it looks like it's a perfectly clean blue sky. And so my point is that we're breathing in a culture of fear every day, and it feels like it's just compassion and wisdom and being safe rather than sorry, as if those are the only 2 options. And it gets into our bodies. It pollutes our thinking, and it really pollution means you can't see or think as clearly as you'd like. And so the only way to sort of get out of that culture and sort of cleanse yourself of this excess fear that our culture is shoving down our throats is by defying it and saying, wait a second, I loved playing outside when I was a kid. I loved going to the store for candy. I loved walking to my grandma's house. And let your kid do something that you did as a kid, and then recognize That wasn't crazy. What's crazy is all the fear that was building up in my head because of this polluted culture.
We have so much to give our kids, but the giving is not more bubble wrap. The giving is not more monitoring. The giving is preparing them for their own lives to be confident and self-assured. So we are certainly going to tell more people. I'm going to follow up more with your community and the Let Grow community as well. And by now, if you're listening to the podcast, the audio version of this, you'll see the websites and resources that Lenore recommends in the show notes. You'll also see these, if you're watching the video, you've already seen book covers and websites there. So I just want to say thank you for the book. Thank you for enlightening us and giving me as a leadership developer more confidence in saying, parents, let's just try this. You'll love it. And I think that's something we all need to hear. So thank you very much, Lenore, and I appreciate your being present in this program.